professional outfit.
Yes,
right?
I thought Gary did a really good job on it too and everything. So, oh Lordy.
Yeah,
I just was relaxed and let the mistakes fly. I didn't even worry about it.
Oh God.
Well, people listened to it. They were probably all astro nerds anyway. So,
Yeah. It's not like you're talking to a group of people you know.
yeah.
So we're recording just so you don't say,
Okay.
"Oh, I'm stupid" or whatever.
Oh, I wouldn't say anything stupid.
Are we recording already?
We're recording right now.
Oh, okay. Well, good to know. Don't say anything incriminating.
I think I would.
Well, you never know if you're not like paying attention. It's like you don't do it intentionally.
I spent actually all of today in a virtual panel.
Mm.
So I've been staring at, the Hollywood squares all day,
Oh,
Zoom.
yeah.
And I still got about an hour's worth of work to do when I get home.
For coffee's worth it.
Yeah. Oh, God. We had about, 5-6 years ago now, had a field campaign in Western Ukraine.
Mm.
And so I spent a couple of field seasons over there
Mm-hmm.
trying to find out what's happening to the people that I know.
Yeah.
I've heard from a couple of them, but a couple of them not.
So, I mean, where are they all going?
Well, most of the people I knew were in kind of the western part of the country, like near Lviv, which I think they evacuated the government to Lviv, which was the big city nearest to where we were.
Yeah, they said they're concentrating on that now because
Yeah.
unfortunately that's where things have picked up.
Well, a couple of the people that I knew that were like our translators that I got to know really well were from the Lviv area. There was one that's from Kharkiv, which I think was one of the first places that actually got attacked. But we had some sites on the east side of the country too, in Melitopol, which is in the Russian part of Ukraine.
Yeah.
And when we first got there, we went on the train, and it was this god awful all-night train trip to get there. And got there at like 5 a.m, and they picked us up in these cars and took us to the guest house sort of place we're staying. Drove through the city square, and there was a statue of Lenin.
Uh-huh.
Is that Lenin? And they're like,
Yeah. Yeah, that's one thing that concerns me is because either Russia or China, if they wanted to do a real cyber attack, they could bring us down very quickly. I think the only reason they haven't is they know we could do them some serious damage too. But I don't know.
Well, anytime you're interconnected.
Uh-huh.
I mean, this is the unprecedented part of this is that everybody's so global now. And because of that, everybody is affected.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I sent an email we had the inquiry from the person in Manhattan, and I followed up with him.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, I
saw your email,
too.
Oh, okay.
And he said he might be interested in coming I asked him if he wanted to come tonight.
Yeah.
He said he couldn't make it tonight, but he's interested in coming
Uh-huh.
next month perhaps. But sounds like, he must have been pretty into it if he's thinking about rebuilding his observatory.
Well, Lincoln had a pretty big following up there. Lincoln and Omaha had an observatory that was
It's
Hyde Park.
Yeah,
Is that what
I
I'm
went to
thinking?
that once. It's one of the sort of external parks in the Lincoln City Park system.
Seemed like it was an old missile silo base.
There was a bunch of those up there, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
The place that, when I was doing research up there, one of the places that we worked was kind of halfway between Omaha and Lincoln, and it was a ammunition factory.
Yeah.
They made ammunition, naval ammunition, like battleship shells there.
I think
So
there was a lot of sack up there, obviously.
this place, the water was really polluted with nitrates because of the.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, they would be.
Anyway, it was a weird place, really strange place.
When I was dodging semis on the way to Lawrence this morning, they were talking about that there's a big field in Kearney, Nebraska, and it's got like about 4 like trailer looking things, and it's nothing but computers that are running cryptocurrency.
Yeah,
Because China, kicked them all out.
it's one of the reasons why it's so hard to buy those GPUs now, and they're so expensive. Isn't it? Are they still sucking those things up? I know when we were trying to buy those things when we started shifting to machine learning models,
Uh-huh.
and it was like, you were in bidding wars to buy these things.
Yeah.
I bought a couple of them not that long ago, and they were less expensive than they were, but still pretty expensive.
Yeah, I wish they'd come up.
Well, I think they're leaving the graphics cards alone now. I think those are starting to drop back down again.
Oh, that's good. I don't know. The ones that we got were pretty hefty ones. I mean, I know we had to buy a bunch of cooling apparatus to go in the computer boxes to keep them.
Yep.
They shut down.
Liquid
if they
cooling.
run too hot. So it's liquid cooling. I got some things.
Well,
Well, it is 7:00. Should we wait a little while and see if we get more customers? Or?
It's up to you. You're
Give them 5
the
minutes.
head. Huh? 5 minutes
Yeah, let's
isn't
give
it?
them 10 more.
Speaking of your,
Do we have anybody online?
Let's see.
You know of?
No, not yet. But even if they don't go online, they could watch you after.
that's true. That is one of the advantages if you've got a conflict on something. I'm going to. Here you go, Russ. Speaking of what's on the back of your computer,
Oh, a dinosaur? Oh, yeah.
that's that Dinos Alive thing at the Great Overland Station.
That Sue, did you go to that?
Yeah, I took my
was it?
grandkids
Yeah,
there.
we're gonna take-
That's amazing. Yeah, I got some pictures if you want to see some of it. That's
Check that
the
out.
Triceratops. This is
How you doing?
taken from the
Hey,
second
good,
floor.
how are you?
Hey, this is
Good.
taken from
Hey.
the second
Hello,
floor.
hello.
But that's interesting, but the real doozy is the T-Rex, the life-size one eating something. This is from the top level of that guy.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, wow.
Uh-huh. You come around a corner and you got these eyes looking at you. Creeps me. Yeah, I took a couple of my grandsons with me. 8-year-old was just,
Oh, was that at the Great Overland Station?
Uh-huh.
Oh, that's awesome.
uh-huh, yeah.
Nice.
Looks like the doggies we used to play with back when we were kids, right, Gary?
When we used to ride the dinosaurs to work.
Uh-huh, yeah. Yeah, I wish we could have gotten those pterodactyls settled down, because flying would have been better.
Where was
It
this?
would've been.
Where is this?
Great Overland Station. in Topeka. It's the Field Museum in
Believe how
Chicago has
bad
this
those
whole thing about
brontosaurus was
dinosaurs.
trained.
Are they
Yeah.
traveling exhibit or
Huh?
something
Yeah,
like
it's a
that?
traveling, it's
I
there till early
bet.
May, I think.
Are these reproductions or are they the actual skeletons?
Well, they're not the actual skeletons because they're too fragile, but they were cast off the actual skeletons.
You know, one of those weird things that happens to you, there's, we used to go to the Denver Museum of Natural History a lot, which is now called Denver Museum of Science or something like that. But
Uh-huh.
they had this big Diplodocus, you know, it's a great thing. And I used to love that thing. And I found out years later that it's not real. It's a copy of this one in Pittsburgh at a
Uh-huh.
museum there. I'd gone to this museum in Pittsburgh and I was reading the little placard and they said, this has been copied in a number of museums
Oh.
and yada, 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 and Denver.
Uh-huh.
My whole life is a lie.
entire-
Yeah, right.
Like my entire childhood is ruined.
Yeah, well, this one is,
No Santa Claus.
You're right.
Well, I knew that already. I apparently got kicked out of preschool for telling the other kids that there was no Santa. My mom would never let me hear the end of that. I mean, never.
yeah. My grandson's standing there, he's 5'7".
Oh, wow, that's cute.
Uh-huh, and you can touch the skin, and they've got, the brass shows where the impressions of the skin were and everything, and there's a thing in the paper today about that was in Discover magazine about this guy who, he goes around and gets dinosaur eggs, And he developed a procedure where he could dissolve the egg enough to see the embryo.
Oh, wow.
That's cool.
Honestly, they're trying to hatch it because they made a whole
Right.
series of movies about that.
No, let's not do
Yeah.
that. Frog DNA.
Right.
Yeah.
That never goes well.
That never seems to end well. Yeah.
Yes, I know.
Well, shall we go ahead?
Yep.
Oh, I would.
Good.
All right. Well, welcome everybody. Thanks for coming out on a cold, brisk, somewhat snowy evening.
What else we gonna do?
It's kind of what I thought too. Shall we do some introductions? I'm Doug Goodin. I'm the president of NEKAAL.
Russell Valentine.
I'm not Russell Valentine.
Neither
Gary
am I,
Oak.
actually.
Mm-hmm.
I'm Tony Castaneda.
Mm-hmm.
Sunshine Castaneda.
Angel Romero.
Janelle Burgard.
And I think we probably had all met one another, but I just. So let's see. I thought I don't have the usual list of. I essentially forgot to do the usual list of upcoming things. So
Oh.
maybe we should just sort of discuss that. What is upcoming?
Board meeting.
We have a board meeting coming up. That's Sunday, right?
This Sunday.
Yeah.
And it's gonna be on mine.
Okay, good.
Yes.
I was going to ask about that.
Yeah.
Next general meeting is March 27th, is it?
Same as this one.
24.
Yeah, I
24.
was thinking.
Okay,
24.
okay. Let's see, I think there's a public night scheduled somewhere.
April.
is
April.
the next one?
Starts in April. Yep.
Okay. Any other announcements or items that,
No, it's just that it's cold out.
it is cold?
Well, I think everybody
cloudy.
pretty well knows that we got a grant from the Planetary Society.
And yes, that was quite a coup. I don't know if any of you got a chance to see the material that the Planetary Society released about that. They had part of their regular podcast had an extended interview with Gary, which
Mm-hmm. Very good.
sounded very good. Made us proud.
Mhm.
I was really kind of very impressed by the quality of the
Mhm.
stuff that had been funded, and on knowing that we were in that group, I thought was a real feather. So
Mhm.
Gary, I think, deserves a huge
Yep.
tip of the cap for that. What's the status on the mirror?
What mirror?
It's frozen.
Last I heard, the guy said that he finally got his cerium oxide to do the polishing.
Okay.
Mm,
Now,
okay, yeah.
that said, I thought he was past the polishing stage and getting
Mhm.
ready to send it to be coated, but he apparently had to wait on cerium oxide to come in. Apparently, that's one of the things that got blocked.
Mhm.
I don't know why. That seems like a strange thing to block. But anyway, he just got started polishing in there a couple weeks ago. He should be finished with that by now. It doesn't take that long. It's just a hereditary, I can't even say it. The process where you go over and over again. And you go test and you go back and you go test and you go back. So, iterative. I guess.
Mhm.
So that's where it's at. And I don't have any other information, and he hasn't contacted me again. So, as far as I know, he should be about done with that stage of it and sending it out someday to the coders.
Mhm.
Now, how long the coders are going to take, I don't know. But it's probably at least 2 weeks.
Okay.
So I'm guessing that we're going to be probably mid-March
Okay.
before we have it shipped to us.
Mhm.
Okay.
I
Maybe
ordered,
April.
it was really early November, I ordered a dishwasher because mine died. And I just got a call yesterday that it's in. So that's what's going on.
Apparently Ford ordered a 14-inch Celestron or mead, 14-inch mead. And I guess he's been waiting now for about 7 months, and they told him it'd be another 3.
Who's this?
Ford.
Oh,
Mikey Ford.
wow. That is, yeah. I mean, I've heard that
Yeah.
things are pretty backed up. But, you think that's going to affect buying the camera?
It might, I don't know. As soon as we get money in the bank, I think we're gonna go ahead and try to get it ordered.
I think it'd be better to do it now.
Because it may be a while.
Mhm.
Well, and prices are probably going to trend up on just about everything. So,
Yep.
Yeah.
catching
Yep.
things while
So-
you can,
Mhm.
at least get the
So-
order in. So,
Mhm.
okay.
Brian and David are online.
Okay, good.
Hi, Brian and David.
Hi, Brian and David. Good to have you with us. All right. Well, Sky,
Mhm.
a couple things. I kind of skipped the news today because the second part of all this is going to be a little bit longer than it was last time. But I thought I'd still talk a little bit about the sky. By the way, should we turn the light off up here, one of the forward lights, to get a little better view of the screen here? And by the way, these sky highlights I've been doing, I don't take these out of my head because I don't store that much information in my head. This is where I find them. Spacetourismguide.com. Is this a site you use sometimes?
I don't think I've used that one. I've got other ones, but not that one.
Anyway, they have monthly highlights of the
Mhm.
night sky. I put it against a nice Flint Hills photo I found, so I
Oh, yeah.
thought that was a nice
Yeah,
one there.
I do send out when I get sky highlights from like Sky and Telescope and whatnot, that goes out to the group on the internet, so.
Okay. So here's some of the
Yeah.
things that are highlights this month. It's a really big month for conjunctions. Last month kind of was too, but there's a number of them throughout the month. I thought this was interesting. Mars and Pluto. I've never actually seen Pluto. It's one of the that and Mercury.
14th magnitude, so that may be why.
You
Yeah.
have to have a pretty. You probably could just manage it with a fairly
Big scope, big scope.
yeah.
It would take pretty big.
Anyway, it is in conjunction with Mars. I thought this was interesting, kind of a triple header here. So
Yeah.
March the 28th would be a good day for conjunction viewing.
In the morning.
This was another one I thought was kind of interesting. If you ever
Yeah.
wanted to do the Messier Marathon, apparently March the 10th would be one of the best
Yeah.
days that you could pick if you wanted to pick up all 101 Messier objects. And I guess in order to have considered to do it, you have to do them all in one,
One night, that's
Night,
the,
right.
that's the theory, yes.
which seems to me like it would be, I don't know, it would kind of take some of the fun out of it, It's like, running a marathon. It's
Yeah,
fun to run a little ways, and I guess to be kind of
well, there's kind of a rest period sort of in the middle
Yes,
there, you
yeah,
know.
because you end up looking to the east in dawn.
Yeah,
So,
You get
but in the middle of the night, you don't
Uh-huh.
have as much to do.
Well, I guess if it's a clear night and you've got plenty of time and on up to morning, the March the 10th would be a good day to do the Messier.
Mhm.
And of course,
Yeah.
March the 20th is the vernal equinox. It actually takes place at 10:33 Central. So vernal equinox, of course, is that point in the orbit of the Earth around the sun when the Earth's rotational axis is perpendicular to the incoming rays of the sun, which means that the distribution of solar energy is symmetric around the equator. The word equinox, by the way, means equal night, which it's not exactly, for a variety of reasons that have to do with the way time is kept. It's not exactly 12 and 12, but it's pretty close.
Mhm.
And of course, this would be one of the days of the year that if you were on the equator at solar noon, the sun would be directly at zenith, directly over your head. It's also the beginning of astronomical spring. Most of my professional preparation was in climate science, and of course, we don't recognize this as the beginning of spring. Spring begins when a certain amount of heat has accumulated, basically.
Oh.
But this is the beginning of astronomical spring. So it's also the day of the year when I'm driving to work and the sun
Yes.
comes
Yeah, right.
directly in
Yes.
my eyes because I go
Right.
along a street.
Sunrise and sunset. you
I
got it.
go along a street that's laid out exactly
Mhm.
east-west, so I get the sun.
That's why I quit going to work.
I'm kind of looking forward to that. And of course, there's all kinds of myths about this, like, this is a day when you can balance an egg on its
Oh,
head.
yeah.
And, whether or not that's true, I think is pretty questionable.
Well, if it's
Oh,
hard
yeah, the
boiled and you
brooms.
crack the
It's-
bottom, yeah, you can stand
it's
it up
not.
there just fine.
Yeah.
It's not.
But anyway, so that's one of the big upcoming events. It's actually a little early for an equinox. They can happen anywhere from between about the 20th and the 23rd.
Mhm.
So this is a little early for one, but anyway, you can celebrate that moment. I had a graduate student years ago that used to created this whole elaborate sort of mythology about the equinoxes and the solstices that involved this thing called the solar zenith angel, which one of the things we calculate a lot in the work we do is called the solar zenith angle. It's the angle between the zenith and where the sun is. And I had another graduate student who could not really get the difference between angle and angel as for spelling, so he would constantly spell it solar zenith angel, and it became
As
the
someone
basis.
who has his name spelled angle all the time.
There you go.
So it became kind of the standard joke, and there was actually little idols created to the
Mhm.
solar zenith angel. So anyway, still have one in my lab as kind of a memento. Anyway, and of course, one of the prominent constellations that shows up is actually kind of starting to not show up.
It's a little more to the west, but it's still up.
And it's also one of my favorite constellations and relates a little bit to what I want to talk about a little later, because it was the very first one I ever learned. And we had some, again, do you want to?
Oh, yeah. This is if you were looking south, actually a little more southwest now, there's a number of bright stars up there, and you can see right there in the center, those 3 stars mark the belt of Orion. And the 2 stars above it and 2 stars below it are quite bright. And so it's one of those constellations that people have seen throughout time. It's also visible from the southern hemisphere, although it looks upside down that way. So there's a lot of stories and mythology and thing about it. You can see in the lower, just a second, in the lower left, you can see there's another bright star down there. You can point to left of Orion, the Sirius down there, the brightest star visible from Earth, and that's Canis Major, the big dog, supposedly the hunting dog. And so if you go to the next one, you can see the stick figure that shows Orion up there. And there is also the rest of it. It doesn't take too much sky to see. On the right side, there's sort of a little arc of stars there, right there. On the other side, where the arm is going up, those are a little dimmer. I was out last night and there was some cloud cover, but you can still see the arc over there. And go ahead and go to the next one. This is a drawing that really shows you some of the major stars, and it shows you the shape of Orion, who's called the Hunter. You will see on different maps and stuff when they try to draw a picture around it, sometimes it's shown as like a soldier. And that arc on the right is shown as just leave it there for now, as a shield, his shield, and then up there he's carrying some kind of a battle club. But if you look at the stars, you'll see the 3 in a row. Al-Nilam is the middle one. Those are the belt stars. And from left to right, there are Al-Natak, Al-Nilam, and Mintaka. And the thing that's interesting about the stars in Orion is the meanings of those star names. And Al-Natak means the girdle, which is another word for belt. Al-Nilam can be translated to be like, some call it the string of pearls, but others use a term that we don't really use, but it has to do with like some kind of a large, like a jewel or a shield or something, an indicator on there. And then on the right side, that's Mintaka, and that means belt. So it's the names that we use for it are all arranged or based on the idea that this is a hunter. And then if you go up to the upper left, we have Betelgeuse. That star is distinctly red. It's a red giant star. And you can see when it goes up upper left, that's shown as like the hunter's club or whatever. That's his arms up there. And then the little kind of point up at the top there, Mesa, from between Betelgeuse and Bellatrix, but up a little bit. Sometimes that's included, sometimes not. And then you go down to Bellatrix, and she is at the end of his arm, which is holding supposedly, you'll see it drawn with either the pelt of the animal he's just killed. Sometimes it'll look like some kind of like a blanket or something to throw over. It just depends. But the interesting thing about these two, Bellatrix actually means female warrior. And how that got in there, nobody's sure, but they think originally it was actually called Bellator, which means warrior, and it got messed up in translation over the centuries. But Betelgeuse, years ago, there was this movie. And someone once counted 36 different pronunciations of that star's name. And there's one that I never used because I would hear it all night long when we were out at Bar Point, drove me crazy. I pronounce it Betelgeuse, some it's Betelgeuse or Gauss or whatever. The thing that's interesting about it, it's translated either as shoulder or armpit. And so you can guess what I tell kids. Then under the belt star is the Orion Nebula. And that's visible just naked eye, even from in the city, if you know where you're looking at. And you see a lot of pictures of that, of course. And it represents the scabbard that holds the hunting knife of Orion the hunter. And then if you go down on the bottom, the one on the left is called Saif, and that's translated usually as knee. And Rigel is translated as, on the right, that's the brightest star. It's a blue-white star. And it's translated either as ankle or foot. And then if you go to the next image, this is a drawing. This is taken from Stellarium. This is the way I think of it because it fits the names of the stars. A lot of the times you'll see it drawn so that Rigel and Saif are like on the foot. And that's not actually accurate. I had to go looking around to find this one. But you can see in this one, it all kind of fits the names of it. The thing that's kind of interesting about the mythology is a lot of cultures see a person in it, but there's some that do not. And there is the one in, I think it's the Lakota Sioux, and then a group in China. They see the belt stars as the three fingers of your hand. Saif is the little finger, and Rigel is the thumb. And both cultures on other sides of the world see it that way. So that's just one of those things. As far as the story behind it, Orion was a great hunter. He was the son of Poseidon and some nymph, I don't know which. And he grew up to be a great hunter. Since he was the son of Poseidon, he was said to be able to walk on waves. And supposedly he walked to an island and had his way with the daughter of the head of the island, the king or whatever, and that got him into some trouble. But he was such a great hunter that he hung around with the goddess Artemis, who was a great huntress. However, she was getting a little jealous of him. That king of the island was mad at him, and Gaia, who was the goddess of the earth, didn't like him too much because he bragged that he could kill any one of the animals on earth. So, having ticked off enough people, yes, they're all women, what happened was Gaia got, as the goddess of the earth or whatever, she pulled some strings and decided that she was going to get rid of Orion. And so what she did was she sent a scorpion who bit him on the heel, and that's why he died. But since he was a hunting friend of the goddess Artemis, and he was basically sort of a great guy, she asked Zeus to put him up in the clouds, in the sky. And that's how the constellation came around. However, he had ticked off enough people, including Gaia, the goddess of the earth, that to appease them, Zeus also put the scorpion up in the sky. But that is why you will never see Orion and the scorpion in the sky at the same time. And that's the mythology of Orion. Oh, that's my reminder to take out the trash, which I already did.
But it was good
So-
emphasis music too.
Yes, there you go. So anyway, but that's the story behind Orion. One of the things I do, and Doug mentioned this, when I've got people out there, I tell them these stories and everything because it helps them remember. And yeah, I hear back from the teachers every once in a while, and sometimes they don't remember the part I wanted them to remember. But anyway,
Did they
whatever.
remember the
So anyway,
stories?
that's the story behind Orion.
One of my all-time favorite movies is Blade Runner. And there's the famous line about attack ships off the shoulder of Orion, and I always wonder if it's that shoulder
Yes,
that one.
right.
You know, because they wouldn't be anywhere near each other actually. But
Well, true.
but anyway. Well, thanks.
You're welcome.
All right. So now, when we met last week or last month, we talked a bit about software, and I thought, that's an interesting topic and an important one, but it really didn't have a story associated with it. So what I wanted to do this month was talk about something that has a little bit more of a story to tell. And I thought this would be a good month, February, to talk about this particular story for a couple of reasons. First of all, of course, Clyde Tombaugh, who our club has a somewhat of an association with, was born in the month of February. I believe February 4th was his birthday. The actual observations that he used to find Pluto were not taken in February, but the analysis of them was. And I believe the actual announcement of the discovery came in the early part of March. So this was the time of year back in 1930 when this particular discovery was taking place. And so I wanted to talk about that and about this story for that reason. And I wanted to talk about it for another reason as well, because this one is kind of personally important to me, because in a way, this is kind of how I came to be interested in astronomy back when I was about 11 years old or so. So this would have been back in the early days of the 70s. And I think I was probably in about the 5th grade. And I don't know if many of you perhaps remember that there were these things called scholastic books.
Yes. Oh, yes.
You could order
Right
these.
there.
And I ordered these 2 scholastic books. These were not the actual copies that I had, but they looked interesting to me. So I ordered The Stars by H.A. Ray, who, by the way, was also the creator of Curious George.
Oh,
And had a
uh-huh.
and this was a book about the stars, as its name would suggest. And of course, it was my kind of introduction to the constellations. And I read this one, The Search for Planet X, which was the story of essentially how Pluto was found. The reason why I put this other stuff on here is because the reason why I bought these is we had, at that time, not long before my family had moved to Colorado, and we had to go back to Pittsfield, Illinois, where my parents were from, in order to visit for Christmas. So that was a long car trip across that part of the country right there, including a pretty big stretch across Kansas. And because of the way my dad liked to do these things, we left in the evening. So I knew it would be nighttime across this entire thing. And I thought I would take advantage of this because at that time we had a car, not this one, but one that looked like this, was a Datsun F510 station wagon. And if you laid down in the back of this thing with the seat and looked out of this, you got a really good view of the sky. And so I thought I will spend my trip from here to here looking at and learning the sky. So I brought my copy of The Stars, and I actually brought this as well. And kind of laying in the back of the car, watching the stars, I think was really where I kind of got interested in all of this. So this is a story that's kind of important to me. But the other thing that really kind of grabbed me about the story was the story of Clyde Tombaugh himself. He was a young man growing up in the Depression who wanted to be an astronomer, and his family situation made it rather difficult. But defying all the odds, he managed it. And I had a pretty good friend who several years ago taught at New Mexico State University, which is where Clyde taught for much of his career, and actually lived in the same neighborhood. And my friend's wife went to the church that Clyde went to. So one day we were out walking, and he said, "Oh, let me introduce you." And of course, that was one of those moments in life where you're like meeting your idol, basically. And he turned out to be a very nice older gentleman, and he showed us his garage. And in his garage were all the telescopes he'd ever built in his life, including this one, which I was rather dumbfounded by. But so anyway, I wanted to kind of tell a story about him too, because I found him to be just a really interesting and significant person. So, and I got to be kind of a fanboy, I guess, a little bit. And made the trip to Burdett, which is where he lived in Kansas. Actually, was born in Illinois, which again I kind of identified with that as well. I was born in Illinois, so I figured this guy was. I felt some kind of kinship with him, basically. So I've had a number of books about him over the years, and have always found him to be this interesting character. So that's one of the reasons why I wanted to talk about this. So I hope it's interesting. And the other thing about this, though, is I think his story really tells us a lot about, in a sense, how we discovered our own solar system, basically. For the longest time, astronomy was really a science about the movement of planets. And, since the astrophysics revolution came in, that's changed quite a bit, obviously. But there's still a lot of interest in that, at least to me personally. So this book in particular was one that I would really recommend. It's Clyde's own book about the discovery and the things that went into it. And I really became kind of fascinated with the story behind how we came to know about these things. And so I wanted to talk a little bit about that as well. And then I want to kind of wrap this up toward the end by kind of addressing the issue of Pluto and maybe I think what Clyde Tombaugh really accomplished. So anyway, we all know, of course, Pluto demoted. This has been old. This is old news by now. I personally don't think that's I don't think that's the right way of looking at it. But we'll circle back to that. But as far as this whole business of discovery, there is kind of a precursor to the Clyde story here. So of course, 6 of the planets, if you include Earth as a planet, which I think we all would, we don't really know when they were discovered. They've been known about for millennia. Babylonian astronomers knew all about them, had recorded their motions, understood their movement. I mean, the word planet itself, if you translate it, basically means something like wanderer. And it really indicates that at least the ancient astronomers, ancient sky watchers, understood that there were, a couple of different kinds of things up there. And there was this one kind of thing that moved visibly on a night-by-night basis, whereas everything else seemed to be kind of fixed in place. Of course, orbits, at least in terms of description, have been understood for quite a long time. So, these 6 here we've known about for a long time. Of course, they're also distinguishable with the naked eye, and that probably explains that. So it's really kind of hard to say when these 6 were really discovered. But it's pretty easy then to kind of trace where the next group kind of came from. And of course, a lot of the work that was done goes back into some of the, in my opinion, more interesting history of science. 2 of the biggies in this were Johannes Kepler, who died in 1630, and Isaac Newton, who was born a few years before Johannes died. Kepler's big accomplishment or big achievement was he basically laid out the math of orbits, and he devised these laws for how things orbit around each other. And then Newton was the one that essentially understood the fact that the reason for that was gravitational attraction. So he kind of laid the foundation for the mathematical understanding of that. Of course, Newton was, you could make a case, probably the greatest scientist that ever lived. I know there's plenty of arguments to be made for a lot of people for that, but I find it kind of fascinating and a little bit annoying that 24-year-old guy has to go home from college because there's plague, and while he's there, he works out, basically invents calculus in order to work out how things are moving. And I would think of that, like, why do I even bother? This guy's so much smarter than I am.
My pandemic was not as productive as his was.
No.
At all.
I think I finished some crossword puzzles. But anyway, the work that they did then sort of laid the foundation in a lot of ways for the discovery of the planets that we historically know when they were discovered and under what circumstances. First, the next planet discovered was Uranus. I think what makes it distinguishable from those original 6, I think about it that way, being a bit of a hockey fan, the original 6 were the first 6 hockey teams, the original 6 planets. What distinguished this one is that it had to be discovered telescopically. You could not discover it, but you could not see it with the naked eye. It was discovered by William Herschel, who was a German who worked in England. Was actually not a professional astronomer. He was, I guess, what you might call a gentleman scientist. His actual occupation was he was a musician. And he was also a very talented telescope maker. This is actually a reproduction of one of the telescopes that he made that he used to discover this. And his big interest was in double stars. And he was a cataloger of double stars and found Uranus almost by accident while he was in the process of cataloging double stars. So we know the situation and the circumstances under which it was discovered.
Just to put an aside on William Herschel, his sister Caroline worked with him a lot. And there are some of his discoveries that later on they decided were probably hers, but they had to be published under his name.
And she was the most prolific female discoverer of comets until Caroline Shoemaker, who was the wife of Gene Shoemaker, and that couple, of course, is the namesake of the Shoemaker grant that we just got. I believe surpassed him, surpassed her. I had some slides of her in here actually, and this thing was getting so long, and I don't want to, kill you with details, but so I unfortunately but I think we could do an interesting presentation on that too. Neptune was discovered, well, I don't know, 70 or so years later, I guess. Also discovered telescopically, but what I think makes this one noteworthy is whereas Uranus, the noteworthy thing was that it was discovered telescopically, so one of the major tools of astronomy, right, the telescope. This was discovered with math. And so now we've got one of the second major tools of astronomy, the use of mathematics. And so the circumstance that led it to its discovery, this kind of harkens back to Kepler and Newton, had to do with attempts by mathematicians to accurately model the positions of the planets, right? So make mathematical models. And if you're only dealing with two things, if you only got two objects out there that are tied to each other gravitationally, it's actually not that hard to do that. But if you start getting more than two, it gets really tricky. And so lots of research into math in those days was often about how you solve this particular problem. And one of the leading mathematicians was this guy, Vernal, who invented many of the methods for analyzing the positions of planets. So what he would do is predict where they were supposed to be and then rely on observations to see if they were actually there. And the difference between those then became the point of what he was trying to do was to kind of understand why there were differences between them. And so what he did was he postulated, looking at the positions of where Uranus was versus where he had predicted it would be, he postulated that there must be something heavy and massive further out, and actually predicted things about its mass and where it should be, and passed those along to astronomers. And one of those, Johann Galle, found it. He essentially pointed his telescope at one point at the point in the sky where the Vernal said it would be, and it was there. And this was actually, in some ways, the beginnings of the discoveries of Pluto, because the methods that were used to predict the position of Pluto were kind of similar to that. So the discovery of Neptune, in some ways, I mean, it's always hard to figure out where a story starts. In some ways, maybe the story of Pluto, you could think about as kind of starting here. And it also kind of led to the idea that there's more planets out there, right? Why should we simply stop at, would have been 7 by then, or 8, I guess? And one of the people that kind of took up the torch on that was Percival Lowell. And Percival Lowell was also not a professional astronomer. He was actually a member of a very prominent family in Boston. I mean, one of his descendants is still on the board of governors, the regents essentially of Harvard. Lowell was an extremely well-educated man, made a fortune in business, because was from a rather wealthy family as well, but his real passion was astronomy, and he was also a very gifted mathematician. And he was very interested in one planet in particular, and that was Mars. And his interest in it was that he thought it was inhabited. And in fact, he declared, here's a New York Times from 1907, he declared that Mars was inhabited, that had people on it or something on it. And he based that on the work of an Italian named Schiaparelli, who claimed, or who at one point published what he called canali. And Lowell and a lot of other people mistranslated the word canali, which in Italian means like channels, as canals, which obviously implies some artificiality. I think what Lowell did that was a little bit noteworthy, I guess you could say, is he took that idea and really ran with it. And his notion was that these canals were being built by a global civilization, basically, that was trying to deal with a planet that was dying, essentially. So his idea was the canals were being built to move water away from the ice caps, which had been observed, down to other parts of the planet in response to a lack of water. And that, in his mind, represented a functioning global civilization. And that's actually kind of an important point in all this as well. Of course, now we probably understand that what Schiaparelli saw and what others saw, including Lowell, when they looked at this through the telescope, was partially an artifact of the real markings on the planet, and partially an artifact of a lot of wishful thinking more than anything else. I think Carl Sagan once said that, they were definitely the result of intelligence. The big question was, on which side of the telescope was the intelligence? And so the reason why I think that all that kind of matters is Lowell was a very avowed pacifist and was dead set against war. There's actually a case where he tricked some people that when he was working in China, essentially tricked them out of a war, starting a war, by playing with language, basically. But he was an avowed pacifist, and he saw in this Martian civilization he thought he was seeing an example of a global civilization working cooperatively. So Lowell's Martians were these kind of benevolent, cooperative people working to survive. Of course, the idea of Martians kind of got planted in the general culture. One of the people that kind of took the ball there was H.G. Wells. His Martians were not benevolent. They were pretty much the most malevolent thing you can possibly imagine. Of course, so War of the Worlds was the Wells's contribution. The other Wells, Orson Welles, of course, created a radio show out of this that caused quite a bit of a panic back in, what was it, 1929 or something?
It was on Halloween,
Halloween,
1948.
1948, was it? Was it that late? Anyway, caused quite a stir, basically. But this was kind of antithetical to how Lowell saw all of this.
It's interesting when you consider that whole War of the Worlds and how people panicked. That was sort of presaging junk on the internet right now.
Yeah,
Ivermectin and whatnot.
yeah. Although
We're a panicky species.
at this point, I think maybe we're so inured to that it takes a lot to panic. But basically, Lowell, for the most part, was considered to be a bit of a crackpot in his day. I think a little bit unfairly so. He actually did some really pretty innovative things. The idea of putting observatories on mountaintops, that was Lowell. Up to then, that hadn't really been done. So he established the Lowell Observatory in Flagstaff, Arizona, largely to kind of research his ideas. Basically, built this state-of-the-art 24-inch Clark telescope, which is still there and still in use. If you ever get a chance to visit the Lowell Observatory, you should. It's a fascinating place. It's like going to a museum, and yet it's also still a real active research center. So if you ever get a chance, I would.
Had some friends that visited there a couple months ago.
It's cool.
Awesome.
It's really a wonderful place. It's like like I said, it's like a museum, and yet also this kind of state-of-the-art facility.
Actually, most of their facility now is out on the,
Anderson Mesa.
the Mesa, Lizard Mesa nearby.
Yeah. It's still cool though. I loved going in this building and seeing
Yeah.
the tires.
Sure.
You know,
Yeah.
Apparently they have blowouts every once in a while. They got to get these tires fixed, but anyway, so Lowell was, kind of flogging this idea that there was this vast engineering work going on, and Lowell was widely believed to be a bit of a crackpot and subject to a lot of ridicule in science. It's been said that perhaps Lowell's interest in planets beyond Neptune was in a defense of that. He thought perhaps if he could establish some bona fides by discovering another planet, that might kind of improve the perception of his other ideas about Mars. And with that in mind, he began conducting a search for what he called Planet X. Started in the early 1900s. He originally used the refracting telescope that he built there. He came to realize that was not really an ideal instrument for this kind of thing, so he borrowed a camera from, I believe this was borrowed from the Sproul Observatory, the University of Wisconsin. Wrote a couple books about it, which you can still find. This particular one right here is in the K-State Library. And began to search for this. And Lowell, as I said, was a really talented mathematician, and he really understood the math that people like Leverrier had developed. And he was actually doing the theory to tell his observers where to search. So he was the one that essentially was doing all of that. Of course, he was hampered by the fact that in order to really do this well, you have to have long periods of observation, and people just hadn't been observing Uranus for very long. So you didn't have that long history of seeing its slight variations in motion, which made the process all the more difficult. And so the search went on for quite a number of years. It was actually divided up into two parts, neither one of which ultimately bore any fruit in Lowell's lifetime. So Lowell died in 1916. This is actually his mausoleum, which is at the Lowell Observatory. You can go visit it. That's his resting place. And at one point, it was kind of thought that maybe that would be the end of the search. When Lowell passed away, his will got involved in probate. Essentially, his widow, Constance, challenged the will, challenged the amount of money that he had left. He bequeathed quite a lot of his personal fortune, which was considerable, to run the observatory. And she challenged the will in court, and it took quite a long time for it to work itself out. This was actually, I found this on the Arizona state legal records. If you Google this, you actually find the final judgment in 1925 that found that Lowell's will would stand intact and would be used to fund the observatory, which is kind of where the story starts again a little bit. So in that period of time between Lowell's death and the resumption of it, work continued at Lowell Observatory. They didn't stop working, but it was under fairly restricted circumstances because, again, the money that had gone, that supposedly was going to go to run the place was tied up in probate. Nevertheless, they had a staff of professional astronomers. Many of these had been hired by Lowell to be the observers for his Planet X searches, but they did other research as well. These were mostly astronomers that have mostly been trained at Indiana University and had gone to work at Lowell Observatory. One of them, this guy was Festo Sleefer, was actually made one of the more significant discoveries in what has later become called astrophysics. He's the one that first measured redshifts of galaxies, and so it was the first one ever to really collect data about the expansion of the universe. And of course, people like Hubble picked up on that later, and it's become one of the kind of defining characteristics of the universe as a whole. But the very first radial velocities of galaxies were measured at Lowell Observatory by Festo Sleefer, and that's actually the spectrograph right there that he used. So now here we have kind of three of the big tools, right? We got telescopes, we got math, and now we got recording instruments. All the things that we still use in one form or another. all at work. So the professional staff continued to do some searches for the Planet X, but without Lowell really doing the math, it kind of languished. But once the probate was cleared, it was decided that by the staff that they should pick up the project again, start looking for Percival's planet, as they called it. So in 1929, it was decided to renew the search. Actually, maybe even a little before that. It was also thought that they needed a better telescope to do this, so they contracted to have this particular instrument built right here. This was an astrograph. It's basically just a huge camera. You can kind of see where the film went right there. It's often said that this was kind of or I've often heard it said that Pluto was found with a crude telescope.